now, Alexander. At least that's what StreamYard is showing us.
Good.
Yeah, this is our first time using StreamYard. Everybody,
it is actually. We're liking this technology, so we hope we don't have any problems with this because it's one we're going to use more regularly. I think is that right, Alex?
Yeah, I'm seeing on YouTube's dashboard right now that we are live. At least that's what YouTube's showing.
Oh, good. Excellent.
So, all right. AK Rex says hello there. Okay, so I guess you see us on your screen. If you can hear us as well, let us know. Alexander, want to say something? See if people hear you?
Well, indeed. I hope everybody can hear me. This has been obviously a momentous day and night in Britain, and we'll obviously be going into the details of this quite a lot. But now we have a clear a government with a clear majority that is going to proceed with its Brexit programme. Now, that means that all those long hours of discussion that we've had earlier this year with all those parliamentary manoeuvres, court decisions and Supreme Court decisions and mysterious motions put together by runaway House of Commons Speaker, all that is now behind us, for good or ill. Well, for good, I think. But the point is that there'll be a Brexit. The kind of Brexit it will be is something we will no doubt want to discuss.
Okay, everyone hears you, Alexander. Everyone is saying hello.
Yes.
Great. It's great to be here on this post-election debriefing. And let's say hi to everybody. Alexander, as more people jump on board.
Well, indeed. And hi. And it's always a pleasure, by the way, to be on these lives because we really enjoy the interaction that we get with people. We hope there's people from all over the world, by the way, not just Britain. Obviously, the British have a particular interest in this subject, but I think that the British elections are always interesting. And the way Britain moves now forward with Brexit is, I think, going to change an awful lot.
Okay. Go on, Alexander.
I mean, obviously, this is the first time a country is leaving the European Union. And it's not just any country. I mean, this is Britain. This is an important power, a former superpower, a country with the second biggest economy of the European Union and a strong ally historically of Germany. So, I mean, people talk a lot about the German-French axis, but on many issues, it's the British-German axis that has really existed. But now that's all ended. I mean, Britain will be leaving on the 31st of January, perhaps even sooner than that, depending on how quickly Boris Johnson gets his act together, which I suspect will be very quickly, by the way. Okay. In which case, Britain will no longer be participating in the European institutions or in the European Council. There will be lots of other things to talk about because obviously the harmonisation issues and whether or not this is going to be a real Brexit at all in the future is something we can talk about too.
Yes, hold that thought.
But indeed, hold that thought, absolutely. But as a political step, this is a momentous one. And it's taken a long time to get here, but here we are.
Okay. Let's see. We have James Holland says loud and clear. All right. Thank you, James. Mars Bluto says also loud and clear. Elisaveta, hi from Russia. Hello, Elisaveta.
Hello.
Okay. Let's see who else. Angela Nicholson. We see and hear you. Great. Hello from Slovenia. All right. Bye-bye, Jeremy Dustbin. That's something else we'll get into.
Well, indeed, we will. He's still there, by the way. He's not resigning as leader for until early next year at some point. And by the way, I should say that I actually think that's a better thing. I've never really liked this system of people just resigning instantly as soon as an election is lost. I think it's much better to hold on for a little while and just to get things sorted out and to get the party working itself out. When party leaders resign immediately, it only causes problems, in my opinion. But there we are.
All right. Hello, Irenarius. How are you doing? Douglas Green. Hi from Berkshire. Boulder Angel. A great day for Britain. All right. From Durban, South Africa. Hello from Kansas. Jose from Spain. Darren from Brighton. Don from Switzerland. Greetings from Panama City. How's everyone doing in Panama today? Sparky. How are you doing, Sparky? Hi from Wisconsin. All right, Russell, how are you? Jan, hi from London. Okay, let's see where else people are joining us from. Alexander. from New Hampshire. Hi from Cyprus. All right. How's everything going in Cyprus? Yes, Cupcake Explosion, 100,000 subscribers. Yeah, yes.
Well, indeed, we're very, very happy with that. And by the way, we should say that we are very grateful to all of you for subscribing to our channel and bringing us up to that level. I mean, this has been an important day for us too. Friday the 13th, as it is, has been lucky for us. Yeah. Even if it isn't always lucky for everybody, but for us, it's been very lucky.
We all did it together.
We all did it together
in the Duran community and everybody who watches us. We really, really thank you for that. And next goal is 1 million if YouTube allows us to get there. We'll see.
Well, we'll see.
We will see. We will see. For right now, we're very grateful and very thankful to be at 100,000. All right. Hello from France, from Washington, D.C., from Northern California, Sweden, the Dutch from Moscow. Cool. Okay, Alexander, let's just jump into it. What are your first thoughts? Boris wins. Jeremy Corbyn steps down. Everyone is reporting this as a very, very big win for Boris Johnson and for the Conservatives. We did a video yesterday about this very topic. I think you were spot on, Alexander. You called this pretty much as it unfolded. You weren't sure how much of a win it would be for Boris, but do you agree it was a decisive win?
Oh, it's a decisive and clear win. There's no question at all. I mean, he's now got a majority of 76, which is a big majority by British standards, by historic standards, and it's the biggest majority that anybody's been able to get in Britain for a very long time. I have to make one important qualification. I've been reading in some places about this gigantic Conservative landslide that has swept all before it. This is not a landslide on the scale of the two big wins that Margaret Thatcher had in 1983 and 1987, when she had majorities of over 100, well over 100. And it's not on the scale of the landslide that Tony Blair achieved in 1997, when he got a majority, I think, of around 150. So this a 76 seat majority is a big majority, but it is not a historically huge one. And I think the other thing I want to say, and I think this is perhaps even more important point, is that the 43% of the vote he got is roughly the same as the percentage of the vote that Theresa May got in 2017. So it's not so much that the Conservatives have surged. They haven't really surged. I mean, they've done very well, but they haven't surged. It's that the Labour vote has fallen back, and it's fallen back a lot. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn got 40% of the vote in 2017. It's fallen back to 32% of the vote. That's a big fall. It's still more, and perhaps this is another point to say, it's still more than his two previous predecessors as Labour leader, Gordon Brown and Ed Miliband, achieved in the 2010 and 2015 elections. So one can't say that, you know, he's not made some kind of progress. He's perhaps left the Labour Party with more support than he had when he took it over. And having said that, there's been a big drop, and in my opinion, there is one overwhelming and straightforward reason. And I know I've seen lots of things about Corbyn being a bad and incompetent leader and an overambitious program and all the rest, but I'd have absolutely no doubt about it. This was the election that confirmed Brexit. Labour went
the second referendum, in other words.
The second referendum, exactly. I mean, the second referendum.
Everyone who wanted a second referendum, they got it.
Exactly, they got it. I mean, the Conservatives fought the election purely on that issue. They didn't really fight on anything else. They made a lot of comments about Jeremy Corbyn being a terrible leader and being anti-Semitic and all the rest. At the end of the day, though, and I have no doubt about this, the reason they won was because of Brexit. Even a lot of the comments you hear about Corbyn's unpopularity is connected to his Brexit policy, which, to be absolutely clear, was a Remain policy. It was a policy of holding a second referendum on a customs union idea he was not even prepared to campaign for. That is a Remain policy, because that kind of referendum could only have had one outcome, which was a vote for Remain. There would have been a massive abstention if it had ever happened, because who would have voted for such a thing? A customs union, which most Brexiteers would not recognise as a Brexit, and which the Labour leader himself wasn't even campaigning for. There would be massive abstention, and the result would have been a vote for Remain. Obviously, inevitably, unavoidably, Leave voting voters, who are the majority in Britain and the clear majority in England, as a consequence of that, consolidated behind Boris Johnson, especially after it appeared to them that Nigel Farage had given them the green light to do so when he withdrew his candidates from fighting Conservative seats. So that was the dynamic in the election. That, by the way, is an important point to hold on to, because it does suggest that the next election, provided the Labour Party remains, doesn't collapse into civil war, which is a distinct possibility, but the next election might have a very different outcome once whatever Brexit Boris Johnson does is done, and the issue of Brexit becomes less polarizing and less urgent than it is now. But this was a second referendum on Brexit. Boris Johnson was, in a sense, the leader, one of the leaders of the 2016 referendum campaign. He won that campaign then in 2016. He's held that same campaign all over again in 2019, and he's won again.
Okay, two comments from users in the live stream, Alexander, and I want you to give us your feedback. From Vidiathis, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Corbyn has always been pro-Brexit, but Labour forced him into the Remainer position. That's number one. And number two, Alexander from Grace, I wouldn't call this the second referendum. It's an anti-Corbyn election. What do you make of those two comments?
Right. Well, the first point to say is that, yes, I agree with the first one completely. I mean, one of the things people don't know is that after the 2016 referendum, the following day, Jeremy Corbyn came out and gave a press conference in which he said he demanded that Article 50 be invoked immediately. He seemed to be taking a very strong Brexit line at that point. And if you go down and watch follow his history as a Labour MP, extending all the way back to 1983, when he was first elected an MP, he was consistently someone who took a very strong anti-EU position. He was a supporter of Tony Benn, the famous Labour left-wing politician. He was strongly anti-EU. And that has always been historically Jeremy Corbyn's position. And I have to say that I think one of the fundamental problems he had, and this is where we now come to the second question about this being an anti-Corbyn vote. I think partly it was an anti-Corbyn vote because a lot of people had, initially supported Corbyn because he was they saw him as this honest, straightforward politician who always said what he thought and always stuck to principles and the principles that he advocated. And what they saw was a Corbyn in this election coming forward with a policy, this, as I said, Remain policy, which he clearly didn't believe in and which he wasn't honest about. He didn't believe in it because he doesn't historically like the EU, and he wasn't being honest about because, as I said, ultimately it was a Remain position, and that contaminated everything else he did and said. People weren't prepared to take him seriously anymore, and an awful lot of people around the country, including an awful lot of former Labour people, got very angry with him in ways that they had not been in 2017, when the perception of him was completely different. So it's those two things. Now, why did he do it? Why did he get himself into this extraordinarily poor position? Well, here again, we come back to the second question. I mean, out of extraordinary weakness, either weakness of, weakness of personality. He was never at any time really in proper control of his party. One could see that. He was surrounded by people in his shadow cabinet like Keir Starmer and Emily Thornberry and all those who were fervid Remainers and were really keen on Remain. But he was also in a politically very weak position in that he has a party leadership, which is a Labour Party leadership around him, which is very pro-Remain, a parliamentary Labour Party, which doesn't like him anyway, which is very pro-Remain, a party membership, which is very pro-Remain. So, not being perhaps a particularly strong leader anyway, he felt or wasn't able to overcome the pressure that was coming from these people to adopt a Remain position, even though ultimately it destroyed his election prospects.
Alexander, taking a look back at the last 3 years, going through this whole Brexit saga from Theresa May to Boris Johnson, and the constant starting and stopping of Brexit and pushing back of the dates and all these things, would it be safe to say that the UK political scene has changed more in 3 years than you've seen it change in, say, 20 years? I mean, I'm thinking UKIP at one point was polling very high, and now I rarely hear about UKIP. The Brexit Party came out of nowhere, and now it's a political force. I think it's safe to say that Farage is the unsung hero in all of this. And in my opinion, he did put country above power and party in this instance. I mean, looking back at the last 3 years as to how the political calculus has changed in the UK, what are your first thoughts about that? I mean, it's been an incredible 3 years, and I think now we're just getting started. The battle's kind of finished, and now we're going towards another battle for Brexit. I mean, we're just getting started now. And the people, the UK people, to me, are like the unsung heroes because they've never wavered. They voted Remain, and over 3 years, they've stuck to Remain. I mean, this is an incredible outcome. The people have stood firm. They did not back down on what they want. This is true democracy.
Well, this is the point about it. I mean, this is where I think, and I have been, by the way, saying this right from the beginning, from my article, the very article that I wrote shortly after the referendum in 2016. It's still there on the Duran, one can find it, in which I said Britain is definitely going to leave the European Union one day, because there's the electorate, the British electorate, is not going to change its mind. I mean, I think I want to say that very clear. I mean, people who thought it would be brought round in some way, it would be bullied, bribed, cajoled, tricked, propagandized, simply don't know how tough-minded the British electorate is. It's the most experienced electorate in the world. We've had elections in Britain since the Middle Ages, and we've had democratic elections, fully democratic elections. Well, I mean, one man, one vote elections since the 20s, and of course women joined in also in the 20s, but the franchise was increasingly extended to them. But it's a very tough-minded, very experienced electorate. Once it decides it wants something, it's going to insist on having it. They were not going to be bullied or brought round, not in the way that we've seen happen in countries like, say, Denmark or Ireland, where you put the same question to them again and again and again.
I think I might have said leave.
Well, you did. You said leave.
I made a mistake. Sorry, guys.
We all know what we all know what you meant, Alex.
People are pointing it out in the chat.
Exactly.
Sorry.
They weren't going to
Go
shift.
on. Sorry,
They
Alexander.
were exactly. They weren't going to change. I mean, all the assumptions and miscalculations were wrong. That's, by the way, why the whole second referendum idea was so misguided. There was no demand from the British electorate for a second referendum because they'd already said what they wanted in the first. So why hold a second referendum to re-argue, to relitigate the whole thing a second time all over again? And I also said that any attempt by the political class to try to stop Brexit in its tracks would only provoke the emergence across England, England being the part of the United Kingdom where the majority of the population, something like 80% lives, and which voted decisively for leave. All that would happen is that a political force committed to seeing Brexit done would emerge and would sweep the board. Now, in May 2019, at the time of the European elections, that political force was the Brexit Party. What has happened is that through this deal that was done between the Conservatives and the Brexit Party during this election we've just had, the torch, if you like, was passed from the Brexit Party to the Conservatives, and that's why they swept the board. It was obvious to me back in 2016 that that would happen, and now it has. And can I just add one further point? I mean, we have spent long hours on the Duran doing video after video discussing all these intricate parliamentary maneuvers that there have been, all these attempts by, Speaker Bercow and Oliver Letwin and Dominic Grieve and all these MPs whom you're never going to hear of again because none of them have been re-elected. All of these people to stop Brexit. We've seen all these court decisions that were obtained, that Gina Miller got this decision that it had to be decided by Parliament. The House, the Supreme Court made this extraordinary decision about prorogation, which was really, again, an anti-Brexit decision. All that did was anger large parts of the British electorate who said to themselves, this is all about preventing us from getting that which we voted for. It provoked them. It didn't stop Brexit, it provoked them. And we see the result.
Can you get into that a little bit on a region basis, Alexander?
Yeah.
Also going into, say, Scotland, Wales,
Yes.
London, Northern Ireland. Can you get into some of how the regions voted on this?
There is a different dynamic in different regions of the United Kingdom. And of course, one has to stress that different regions of the United Kingdom voted different ways in the referendum. So Scotland voted overwhelmingly Remain. London voted overwhelmingly Remain. The rest of England, including the north of England, where Labour has traditionally had its heartland seats, the so-called Red Wall that many of you may have been reading and hearing about, that voted Leave mainly. I mean, places like Manchester voted, which is a big city in the north, voted largely Remain, but other parts of England voted Leave. Northern Ireland has a very distinctive politics. The major parties, the Conservative and Labour parties, don't campaign there. Northern Irish politics are divided between unionist parties, which are Protestant, and nationalist pro-Irish parties that want union with the Republic of Ireland, which are mainly Catholic. They beat to a completely different drum. And what's interesting about this election is that it has basically reproduced that same pattern. So if we take Scotland, Scotland is the region where the Scottish Nationalist Party, which is a left-wing party, which could very easily have allied itself in a coalition government with the Labour Party. The Scottish Nationalist Party swept the board in Scotland. They have done incredibly well there. They've improved on their showing in 2017. And the leader of the Liberal Party, by the way, the Liberal Democrat Party, which is the most ultra Remain party in Britain, they simply wanted to revoke Article 50. She had her seat in Scotland, that's Jo Swinson, and she's lost her seat. So she's no longer even in Parliament. So in Scotland, which is a Remain stronghold, which is traditionally a left-wing region in Britain, the Scottish Nationalist Party won overwhelmingly. In London, which is a much more complex place, it is a more confused picture. But there you see Labour doing well. I mean, it held on to its seats. It actually improved its positions in one or two places. It didn't win many seats, except it won a seat in one part of London called Putney. Outside London, the areas which voted Leave, you see a very clear swing to the Conservatives. So that's what you need to understand. And that's, by the way, also, I say England, people always remind me that, you know, there's also Wales. Wales, for some reason, which I don't completely understand why, by the way, because I'm not very familiar with Wales, but Wales tends to vote on these issues in a similar way to England. Wales also voted strongly for Leave, except for the capital, which is Cardiff, again, the big city, London, Manchester, Cardiff, they tended to vote Remain. But, you know, the hinterland, the regions there, the small towns, the villages, people voted Leave. And again, you see Conservatives doing better there. So that is the overall pattern. Now, as I said, a landslide, I mistrust that word a bit, because if you look at the percentages, they're not radically different from what they've been in previous elections. But if you look at the distribution of the votes, with most parliamentary constituencies in England having voted Leave, despite the fact that the Conservative vote overall has not increased by much since 2017. They've managed to win an awful lot more seats rather, on that same percentage than they were able to do in 2017. They did it because of the fall in the Labour vote in its heartlands, in its heartlands in the north and in the Midlands, and because Leave voters are concentrated there. So that's the dynamic. It reflects very closely the dynamic of the referendum.
Right. So going back to Corbyn, do you have any idea who's in line to replace him?
Lots of discussion, and I think this is going to. Well, I'm going to mention a few names in a moment, but can I just say a few things? I mean, it really does depend a lot on what the Labour Party thinks it's doing, because one of the things which has been really concerning to me over the last couple of hours, I say concerning because the Labour Party is an important institution in Britain, and it's been one thing that it has managed to achieve. I mean, when a few weeks ago, Labour was polling 24% of the vote, so they've increased it to 32%. There was some talk at the start of the election that the Labour vote would implode and Labour would be challenged by the Liberal Democrats in many places. The Liberal leader, Jo Swinson, imagined that she might get 80 MPs at the end of this election and would be able to hold the balance of power. What actually happened was Labour re-established itself decisively, and we mustn't overlook this, established itself decisively over the course of their campaign as the main opposition party. And the Liberal Democrats, they saw a certain increase in their vote, but not by very much. And Jo Swinson lost her seat, and overall, they won one less seat than they did in 2017. So they haven't actually done at all well. And for those people who say, by the way, that the Labour Party lost because their program was too left wing and was not Remain enough, just consider that the alternative centre-left party, even more pro-Remain and far less radical in some respects than the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, completely failed to break through, and their leader lost a seat. So, you know, let's just bear that in mind. If the Labour Party, which is now re-established conclusively as the main opposition party, if it makes the mistake of going back down the road of Blairite triangulation, in other words, if it elects a Blairite MP as its leader, somebody who wants to revert to the sort of policies of the Blair years, total support for the EU, attempts to narrow the differences between Labour and Conservative as much as possible, then I think it's going to be in serious trouble. I think it's going to have to face that it's got to move beyond this disastrous Remain position that it landed itself with. So people like Sir Keir Starmer, who was the party's Brexit spokesman, who was a fervid Remainer, who was apparently the architect of the second referendum policy, who in fact bounced Jeremy Corbyn into the second referendum policy at the 2018 party conference, making a speech which hadn't even been agreed with Corbyn in advance. If it's Keir Starmer who's the leader of the Labour Party, I think the Labour Party is going to struggle. There are other people who I think have a potential to take the Labour Party in a more effective direction. And, you know, I'm not going to say this person or that, but some names that one hears. There's a solicitor who's a Labour MP, Rebecca Long Bailey, who's from Manchester. There's another person called Angela. Oh goodness, Radin. I haven't got her name correct, but she's another possibility. There are some people within the Labour Party who I can see who could start to reach out back to the working class Leave voting electoral base that has refused to support the party in this election.
Okay, a couple of more questions, Alexander. I'll just rattle them off and you can answer them. Brexit Party did not win any seats at all from Andrew. Is that true? Brexit Party?
Yeah, it didn't win. It didn't win any seats. I mean, if I may say, I mean, the moment Farage announced that he was going to pull all his MPs from Conservative seats, that in effect ended any prospect of the Brexit Party winning seats, because from that moment on, it became very difficult to argue, for Farage to argue that he disagreed really with Boris Johnson on Brexit. Having said that, I would say that there were places in the Midlands and in the north of England where the Brexit Party actually won quite a lot of votes in Labour seats, and I've seen several places where, in fact, you know, it won thousands of votes in individual constituencies from working class voters who probably weren't willing to vote Conservative but wanted Brexit, and that may have made the difference and enabled the Conservatives to win in several constituencies. So even though it didn't win any seats, I think it did have, frankly, a profound effect on this election.
Okay, from Isabella. I imagine Isabella is from Wales. She says that Wales doesn't vote as England does. We are heavily socialist in our outlook and always have been. Our history goes back 1,500 years to show that.
Well, that is entirely true, by the way. I mean, it's again, I mean, Wales historically, or at least South Wales, was a very, very much a Labour stronghold. And it's been, I should say, I haven't been, it's the part of the UK, by the way, which I don't know. I just, for some reason, I don't really know it very well. I know the south of England quite well. I know a bit in Scotland because I have Scots friends, but Wales, for some reason, I've never really got to know quite as well. But that Wales was historically a Labour stronghold, or South Wales was, is true. There were large coal mining regions in southern Wales, and many of the most famous Labour politicians, Aneurin Bevan, who created the National Health Service, he was from Wales. Michael Foot, who was a very important Labour politician who led the Labour Party for a certain time and led it to electoral disaster in 1983, but that's another story. He represented a Labour seat, and Neil Kinnock, who was the Labour Party leader in the 1980s and who was Margaret Thatcher's adversary in the 1987 election, when, by the way, he was widely judged to have done rather well, and who was also defeated by John Major in 1992. He too was from Wales. So Wales has a huge history within the British Labour Party and the British Labour movement. And it's also, as I said, definitely got a socialist and left-wing tradition. I would add, another famous Welsh politician was David Lloyd George, who was the Prime Minister of Britain and first as Liberal Prime Minister of Britain, Liberal Chancellor, and the man who created the foundation, many people feel, of the British welfare state. So that gives you an idea of what traditions we're talking about in Wales.
Okay, so from the order, Alex and Alexander, do you think that Boris will get us out of the EU military unification, i.e. meaning aircraft carriers and intelligence is what Britain puts in, Germany puts in the army, etc. So do you think that this split also carries over to the military industrial complex?
I wish I could say. This is always the great problem with Boris Johnson. One never really knows with him, because one thing I have absolutely no doubt about, he will carry out he will pass his deal that he's negotiated, which he actually negotiated with Emmanuel Macron, as we've discussed in previous programs. So Britain will leave the political structures of the EU. And he says that he's going to have a final conclusive agreement with the EU for presumably some kind of free trade zone or something of that nature by the end of 2020. And by the way, I believe him. I mean, I know a lot of people say this is impossible, it can't happen, this is going to be far too complicated. I think it's entirely possible if the political imperative is there. And I think Boris Johnson understands very well that he's now so identified with Brexit that he has to be able to tell the British people at the end of 2020 that he's got Brexit done, to coin his own phrase. But what that Brexit will actually mean, I am not really so sure. At a political level, I'm sure we will no longer be part of the European Council, will no longer be participating in in the European foreign policy. I mean, people like, the EU's External Affairs Commissioner will no longer be representing us in the way that if Federica Mogherini did. They won't be representing us in the way that they used to. And the EU, I am sure, will not be representing Britain in trade negotiations with other countries. But of course, it goes to an awful lot more than that, because if we end up with a system of harmonization, for example, whereby we try to keep our economy as closely connected to the EU as possible, then trade deals with other countries start to become very problematic, and we start getting drawn back, in a way, into the EU's economic system. And as for the military relationship, Britain already has a very strong military relationship with France. Boris Johnson gets on extremely well with Emmanuel Macron. Macron speaks English. Johnson speaks French. Apparently, they, relate to each other extremely well. We saw them chatting happily together at the UN and chatting happily together at the NATO summit in Watford. So, I have to say, the possibility of deeper military ties with France is a distinct possibility. There are deep military ties already, but they could get even deeper. And at a time when Macron is pushing so hard for a European army, ultimately, obviously, led by France, one wonders what the implications of that would be. So, I don't have a simple answer to that question. What I would say is that if we do go down that road, there will be an awful lot of opposition in Britain. An awful lot of people will not want it.
Okay. Shout out to Cheryl. Thank you for posting our stats there. Cheryl, 525 likes, 2,500 viewing. Thank you very much for that, Cheryl. It really helps me out a lot to see that in the chat. Alexander from Ark Harmon. Alexander, what do you think of Bristol? Can you do a brief analysis?
Bristol. No, I'm afraid that's one particular constituency. I'm not going to, I don't know, because I haven't seen. I mean, there is an enormous amount of granular studies on polling that needs to be done. I mean, for me, at the moment, I'm with the broad brush regions. Okay. I haven't been able to go to the, 600, whatever it is, constituencies up and down the country, and I can't really say. I seem to remember that Bristol was another place that was Remain, but if somebody wants to contradict me and correct me on that,
how it voted, let us know in the live stream.
I don't know.
A lot of people.
I saw one question which I'd quickly like to touch on, which I saw somebody asking whether the Queen can vote in elections. The answer is no, she can't.
A lot of people are talking about Scotland in the chat. Alexander,
yeah, and they're right to.
The
Scots situation is very.
Scotland. Do they do another referendum now? What's
there are some people who probably feel, in fact, undoubtedly do feel, that Scotland doesn't need to do another referendum. That with the Scottish Nationalist Party having swept the board in Scotland and firmly in power in Holyrood, that's the Scottish National Government, which is based in Edinburgh, there is no reason at all why Scotland can't just declare itself independent. I think there would, in practice, be a second referendum in Scotland, another independence referendum in Scotland. Scotland, as we have seen in this election, beats now to a radically different drum from England. And there's always been, at some sort of level, you see it in football matches and things like that, a sort of tension between Scots and English, which can both be overstated and understated. I mean, a lot of Scots have a long tradition of feeling resentful towards England. A lot of English people feel, especially in the north of England, feel that Scotland has had, an exceptionally good deal at their expense. So there are tensions. And I think this result that we've just seen, it may trigger, in fact, I suspect it probably will trigger stronger moves in Scotland towards leaving the UK. So another referendum to leave the UK. So it's not impossible. I would say something, by the way. I mean, that would be quite a big body blow, I think, psychologically, to the political class in London, if that were to happen. And if Boris Johnson presides over that, if he's Prime Minister when it happens, then I think it would actually it would be a considerable dent for him. I think a lot of people would feel that this is a big blow to him and to his prestige, and to the prestige of the country that would be left, which would be England.
Yeah, England and Wales. Prime Minister wants that as their legacy.
No. So he will oppose it. He will strongly oppose it, and he said as much. But of course, the extent to which he can oppose it is another question.
Okay, and that takes us to our super chats. Alexander from Maureen Johnston, a super chat on Scotland, SNP1 in Scotland. What are your thoughts?
Well, we've just been discussing it. As I said, it has a completely different politics. Scotland is much more left-wing overall than England is. I should stress there are parts of England which are very left-wing. So, we mustn't say that England in general, universally is more right-wing than Scotland. And there are parts of Scotland which are more conservative. But the two kingdoms overall, Scotland is considerably politically to the left of England. It's also, as I said, a Remain stronghold. It's the people there, possibly in reaction to attitudes in England, are strongly pro-Remain. So this divergence has now become so strong, so great, and it's now been given institutional form, because we have in England the Conservative Party, the party of Brexit, as it now says, the party that is, supports capitalism, the free market, all those things. They're in charge. And in Scotland, you have the Scottish Nationalist Party. They support Scottish independence. They have a social democratic or socialist ethos. They are pro-EU. They're in charge. Each of them has separate parliaments that they control. There is obviously the main part, the Parliament of the United Kingdom in London, which is dominated now by the Conservatives. But there is also a Scottish Parliament in Holyrood, this suburb of Edinburgh, which is in power in Edinburgh. So there is an institutional division which already exists, and a complete difference in political culture. I have to say, that does look to me as if it could be preparing the ground for some kind of independence moves, probably before very long.
All right. There is an interesting comment from Maria. I think Scotland doesn't need a referendum, but
no, I think
it should be this. Either Scotland chooses to remain in the EU or the UK Union, because it cannot do both.
Well, that's entirely right. I mean, I have to say, I think it's not quite as straightforward about Scotland just remaining in the EU. I think that if Scotland, as things stand, even if Scotland were to try and secede before the 31st of January, which I think would be possible for all kinds of reasons, I still think that the EU would consider it part of the United Kingdom. And even if it recognised Scottish independence, Scotland would have to reapply to join the EU. But, I'm sure it would be able to. I don't think there's any significant doubt about that. If the Scots want to be a part of the EU, if it is so important to them, then they can't remain a part of the United Kingdom, because the United Kingdom is leaving. I mean, they might still be a kingdom with the Queen as their sovereign, but it would not be the United Kingdom that we have had of Great Britain, which includes England, Wales, and Scotland. So it would be a different entity.
Okay, from AK Rex, £5 super chat. New UK citizen here, first time voted for Rab, and yes. I ordered a crispy gold grilled Corbynated chicken. Boris Johnson did not leave me disappointed.
Well, can I just say, actually,
it was a big win. It was a big win.
It's a decisive win. And can I just say something? I mean, I come back to what I said. Over and above the impossible position the Labour Party conducted the campaign in. I mean, this is, I mean, it was designed to fail. It was difficult to understand, actually. It shows, to my mind, how completely out of touch many of the Labour leaders and the Labour Parliamentary Party was. I mean, they're far too concentrated, as I said in a recent video, in London to really understand feeling in across the UK and across England. But putting all that aside, all those manoeuvres that they were engaged in before the election to try and stop Brexit, Speaker Burker supporting Oliver Letwin's amendments, the Yvette Cooper's, teaming up with Letwin to make, to stop a no-deal Brexit, when we all really knew that what they were really all about was stopping Brexit. All of that, I think, in the end, did a huge amount of damage. But
they tried to pull all kinds of fast ones.
All kinds of stuff. And I mean, ultimately, they treated the electorate as stupid. They thought they were all stupid. They're not stupid. I mean, I've had so many discussions about this. I mean, I had a very difficult discussion, which you can also find, by the way, on RT Crosstalk, with a Labour Party stalwart called Lee Jasper, who's very much a prominent figure in the London Labour Party historically, and he was a fervid Remainer. And I was trying to explain the facts to him, the political realities, and I found his attitude both bizarre in the extremeness of his denials, and also incredibly condescending to the people who were the traditional electoral base of his own party. You can't treat your own voters as fools. They will see through it. They're not fools. They know what you're trying to do. They know that you're trying to stop Brexit. It was a very bizarre thing to have done. By the way, can I just make a point about Corbynated chicken, just for everybody to know, because this is a bizarre thing. But one of the big things that we've been hearing from all kinds of Remainer people is that, well, bizarre things. One of the things people are saying is that, a trade deal with the US would be a disaster, because the US has very different food standards to us in the UK, which is true, by the way, and that would involve imports from the United States of chlorinated chicken. The Americans chlorinate their chicken, presumably to make it safer, also they think. And of course, this is absolute anathema here in Britain. And this has become, believe it or not, quite a big issue for some people, but obviously people of the Remainer persuasion. So this is the pun that this viewer was making.
Right. All right. From Bernard Johnson, a super chat. Can Boris have enough seats to pass a no deal Brexit? A real no deal Brexit.
I don't have any doubt about this. I mean, this is where I think the contrast between Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn is so striking. I mean, Boris Johnson comes along, he becomes Conservative leader on a very clear position. 31st of October, which is at that time the Brexit date. We will be out, deal or no deal. There's a very clear position. He's elected Conservative leader on that. Then when Conservative MPs, when he becomes a Conservative leader, he sacks all the key Remainers in the cabinet. So people like David Gauck, Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, they're all out. He throws them all out. Then when they start rebelling against him, he expels them from the Conservative Parliamentary Party. 21 of them. I remember reading all these newspaper articles saying how outrageous this was that he would do this thing and get rid of all these wonderful, noble Conservative MPs who were sabotaging his Brexit policy. But he just sacked them, and most of those, by the way, all of them, 10 of them applied to be readmitted to the Conservative Party and were allowed to, but 11 of them didn't. They all tried to stand as independents, and every one of them has failed. So he cleared out the most prominent Remainers within the Conservative Party. And then, of course, he did this extraordinary deal with Emmanuel Macron, which is a person he really negotiated with, which meant getting rid of the Irish backstop by accepting a customs border in the Irish Sea, which he had previously promised the Protestants, the Democratic Unionists, the Protestant Party in Northern Ireland, that he would never do. And then, last but not least, he backstabs Nigel Farage, who undoubtedly, I think, did think when he withdrew his candidates from fighting Conservative seats during the election, that the Conservatives would reciprocate the favour by giving the Brexit Party a clear run in some Labour seats. So Boris, whatever you may think of the man, has been utterly single-minded and completely ruthless. I mean, he's got an instinct for power. He may not be a good manager. I've heard of many people, by the way, that he's not a good manager. He may come across as a dithery, eccentric individual, but he showed that he was in charge, and the electorate, the British electorate, undoubtedly responded to that. Given a choice between a strong leader Boris Johnson, and a weak leader, Jeremy Corbyn, they will always choose a strong leader. That's an important point to make. Now, he is in control of his party. He has a majority, a big majority. He's purged all the most important Remainers, all the really famous ones. People, all these people that I named: Philip Hammond, Dominic Grieve, David Gauck, even Kenneth Clarke, who was a sort of, the longest standing Conservative MP and fervid Remainer. They're all gone. Oliver Letwin that we were talking about. So if he wants to press ahead and get a no-deal Brexit at the end, or let's not call it a no-deal Brexit. I really hate that word anyway. A clean-cut, total Brexit at the end of 2020, he can. There's nothing to stop him. I don't believe that the Conservative Party would rebel against it.
Interesting. Okay, from Thomas X. Smith, £2 super chat. Bye NHS.
Well, okay. Now this is a very good question, because of course the National Health Service is of course the health service system in Britain, which was created by the Labour government, by Nyron Bevan, who I mentioned before, in the 1940s, the post-war Labour government. It's been an absolutely central institution in British life. It provides people with care, free medical care, and it's something that the British people are very attached to. And actually, as a person who uses it regularly, I have to say that I hear lots of criticisms of it, but I wouldn't want to replace it. I think it's a very, very good system. It's also a system that has not been in good shape for a long time. It's been faced constant reorganizations. It's had much of its administrative systems that they become very scrambled. It's become very bureaucratic. And of course, part of the reason for that is we've had many, many years now of Conservative governments and of austerity. And the Conservatives, I think, have never really wholeheartedly believed in it. I mean, I know they say they do, but I don't think they ultimately do. And there are many people who are very concerned that the NHS is in very bad shape at the moment, that it's not going to be properly funded by the Conservatives and by Boris Johnson, and that sooner or later they will move forward. The Conservatives will move forward and use the power that they have to basically break it up, to privatize many of its services, to make many of its services, you have to pay for them. In other words, to move radically away from the model that was created in the 1940s. Now, I think there are some people in the Conservative Party with that agenda. I am not sure that Boris Johnson is one of those people. He went into the election promising that he'd put more money into the NHS. And I think he again realizes that for many people, including many of these people who voted for him in this election because of the position he took on Brexit and because they didn't like Jeremy Corbyn's position, if he starts tampering with the NHS in that kind of way, then I think he will lose them, and that could put his whole future position come the next election in considerable jeopardy. But I come back to what I said. It all depends too on how the Labour Party reorganizes itself. If it descends into some kind of a civil war, as the Labour Party sometimes does, it might not be in a position to oppose such a reform. And undoubtedly, there are Conservatives within the government who probably would welcome such a possibility. So the breakup of the NHS is not impossible. One thing I would say, which I think is impossible, and it was featured in the election, is that Boris Johnson would trade the NHS in some ways with Donald Trump. Did he do a deal letting American companies, insurance companies and the like, move into the NHS as part of a trade deal with the United States? I think that would be extremely unpopular in Britain, and I don't think Boris Johnson would want to do that. So goodbye the NHS. Maybe not. I think on balance, perhaps not. I don't think Boris Johnson really wants to go there, but we will see.
Okay. Mikhail Ende sent us 3 separate super chats with no question of SEK20.
Well,
thank you, Mikhail, very much for that.
very much indeed.
Really appreciate that. And from Sparky, a $5 super chat. Congratulations, fellas, on 100K subscribers.
Well,
you'd have done it a year or 2 ago if YouTube hadn't held you back for telling the truth.
Well,
thank you very much, Sparky.
But we got there. Thanks to all of you.
Exactly. And Sparky follows that up with another super chat. Corbyn bowing to war criminal Tony Blair's will was the coup de grace.
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is entirely correct, because, of course, the person, and we talked about all these Remainers in the Labour Party who forced this impossible policy on Corbyn, the man who was out there pulling the strings, and it became very obvious, by the way, that he was pulling the strings, and also, and this I still find incredible, going off to Brussels and advising people within the European bureaucrats there, the people in the Commission there, to take the hardest possible line with Britain in order to stop Brexit happening. The person who was doing all of that was Tony Blair. And given that Tony Blair is no friend of Jeremy Corbyn's, and that's putting it mildly, it is extraordinary that Corbyn was either unwilling or felt himself unable to stand up to him. I mean, I read an article recently, but I think it was Neil Clark, who's quite a well-known journalist here, but who's been, because he has sort of dissident views, banished to writing for RT and Sputnik. But he used to write for The Guardian and very much mainstream media here. Anyway, I mean, he made the point that the true leader of the Labour Party has been Tony Blair, not Jeremy Corbyn at all, because it was Tony Blair who basically was the person ultimately responsible for this impossible position. And Blair, by the way, resurfaced during the election in the company of his old sparring partner, John Major. So John Major, who was at one time Conservative Prime Minister. And they were both calling for people to vote against the Conservatives, so as to get a hung parliament to stop Brexit. So, I mean, that didn't help at all from Corbyn's point of view. That didn't help the Labour Party at all. And of course, it resulted, I have no doubt, all the things that Blair did resulted in the Labour defeat we have seen and Boris Johnson's victory. You won't see Tony Blair, by the way, admitting that, and already his supporters at the Labour Party, of whom there are many, and in the media, of whom there are also many, are blaming it all on Corbyn rather than on Blair, even though, as I said, Blair's fingerprints are all over this.
Okay, from JoeBot92, a £10 super chat. Thank you for your work. Thank you for that super chat, JoeBot92. We appreciate it very much. From Sparky, $5 super chat. British legendary ability to put up with BS and patiently wait for the desired outcome may have paid off. It remains to be seen if Boris will betray them.
Well, indeed, absolutely. But of course, if he does, then there will be political consequences. We've seen what the political effect was for the Labour Party if Boris Johnson turns around and does something, retreats from a Brexit position, then frankly, the Conservatives risk suffering the same fate. Can I just say, I mean, we must not think that the Conservative position is an invincible one. I mean, I've lived through many, many elections in Britain. If you go back in time to the 60s, in 1966, Harold Wilson and the Labour Party won with a bigger share of the vote and a much bigger majority than Boris Johnson has achieved. And 4 years later, when a lot of people felt that they hadn't done what they promised to do, they were out. So this is not a indefinite mandate that the British people have given to Boris Johnson. It is a conditional one. In Britain, it always is.
Okay, from Mikhail Ende, another super chat. Do you really understand what 100K means in KLQ?
No,
I'm not sure I understand that super chat,
no,
but Mikhail, if you can go on the live stream and explain it, that would really help us out a lot.
absolutely,
We
absolutely.
appreciate the super chats,
Yeah.
though, very, very much. And we'll try to answer that question, what
Yeah.
it means. We'll try our best.
Yeah.
From Magnesia Shan, Swinson should have combed her hair.
Well, I mean, I think Swinson, by the way, is the leader of the Liberal Democratic Party, the Remain arch centrist or centre leftist party, which presented itself as the sort of anti-Corbyn left, attracted a lot of Labour MPs who didn't like Jeremy Corbyn and switched to the Liberal Democrats after their attempt, by the way, to set up their own party proved a dismal failure. And of course, Swinson went into the election saying that she would, if she became prime minister, which is a ridiculous idea. There was never any possibility that the Liberal Democrats would become, would win the election. I mean, that's an absurd notion. But if she did, she would simply revoke Article 50 without a referendum. And she was also the person who said that under no circumstances would she ever go into coalition with Jeremy Corbyn. And of course, she also invited Guy Verhofstadt from the European Parliament to the Liberal Party conference. And that was where he made the famous proclamation about the European Union being an empire. So that was her policy. Now, actually, in a very crude and frankly unintelligent way, I could just about understand the logic of what she was trying to do. She was trying to win Labour Remain voters by taking an even more extreme Remain position than the Labour Party was taking. And that was all about, that was what revoking Article 50 was all about. And she was also trying to win over conservative Remain voters by saying that under no circumstances would she go into coalition with Jeremy Corbyn. But in fact, neither Conservative Remainers nor Labour Remainers were at all interested or persuaded. And it's the sort of simplistic and naive, if I may say so, strategy that he's bound to fail. I mean, you have to persuade people that you have a realistic strategy. You can't have the leader of the Liberal Party telling the very much bigger Labour Party who its leader should be. And you can't tell the British electorate, well, you may have voted one way in a referendum, but really that doesn't matter, because if I ever get my hands on the levers of power, I'm going to cancel it. So it all came apart in the election. She became very widely ridiculed, and she lost her seat. She lost her seat to the Scottish Nationalists because she's a Scottish MP. But I am quite sure that one of the reasons that she lost that seat is that in Scotland, Jeremy Corbyn is actually quite popular. As I said, Scotland is further to the left than England. And I think a lot of people there just didn't like her whole approach, both to the referendum and specifically to Jeremy Corbyn.
Okay, from Mikhail at 20 SEK Super Chat. Alex, you are a perfect CEO, Mikhail.
True, I agree.
Thank you. Thank you for that. From Phil Cooper, if Scotland got their independence, would the EU accept them, or would Spain veto
a very good
the
question.
accession? Wouldn't Scotland be barred from using the GBP?
That is an absolutely excellent question. I think an awful lot of people in Scotland, if I may say, are actually rather naive about this. I think they think that the EU would welcome Scotland with open arms. I think an awful lot of EU member states would be actually very uneasy about admitting a breakaway part of the United Kingdom after the United Kingdom had left. And Spain, with all its problems in Catalonia, is a case in point. But it's not just Spain. I mean, Lots of parts of the EU have had these issues. I mean, even France, by the way, there are parts of France which, where there's been talk of independence at various times. Even Germany. So it's not as straightforward as I think a lot of people in Scotland think it is.
Okay. From Mikhail Ende, do you understand 100K IQ? I'm still not quite getting it, but some people in the chat are saying 100K in the UK means 100,000 pounds. Is that correct, Alexander? Or
well, it could do.
It could
do 100,000 pounds. It would do actually. But I think what he's saying by bringing up the issue of IQ is that's probably a sign of how prodigious our IQ is. I'm afraid I've mislaid.
Okay.
I've mislaid.
Yeah, it is late. It's been a long week, but thank you very much.
Very much. Yeah,
we always appreciate it.
Exactly.
And Magnesium Shan, who knows where the Franco-Anglo armed forces are heading? Question mark.
Well, indeed, who indeed? I mean, you know something. I think even Boris Johnson, if he was to look at himself in the mirror and were to ask himself that question, I don't think he really knows. I mean, Boris is not a deep planner. He doesn't strategize, in advance in that way. He is a politician who very skillfully and very ruthlessly, as we've seen, deals with things one at a time as they come to him. So I don't know where this is going. So far, what we can say is that he's forged this very close relationship with Emmanuel Macron. And I think he will want to preserve that. And Macron does have these grand strategic ideas. I mean, he's awful at them. He doesn't really know what he's talking about most of the time. But Macron does try to do grand strategy. Boris Johnson doesn't. He has doesn't have a clue about that and isn't interested in it. I can see a scenario where Boris Johnson is led by the nose by Macron. I don't think it's an impossibility.
Okay, Chiro, 100,000 intelligence quotient is not humanly possible. No, it is not.
I'm sure.
Okay.
I'm sure. I mean, we would have to have brains.
You have to drink a lot of magic mugs for that. All right.
Well,
from Sparky, a super chat. Splitting the vote was a paper tiger. Labour wasn't a threat. Farage shouldn't have surrendered. Now there's no leverage against Brexit in name only.
Well, I have to say straight away that actually that is my view. If I had been advising Farage, and by the way, I should say that I know one prominent Brexit Party person who was in contact with Farage, but I don't know whether he passed on my views to him. I made my views very clear. If I'd been advising Farage, I would have advised him to fight the election.
Oh yeah.
I would have wanted him to do exactly what the questioner says, because I think that you need always to have the Brexit Party out there holding the Conservative Party's feet to the fire. I actually think that if we'd had that happen, I still think the Conservatives would have won, because, as I said, the Labour position was an impossible one, but not by perhaps such a big majority, but with the Brexit Party there to put pressure, and perhaps with some MPs. I mean, it would have made a difference, and no question. I mean, we would have had a more confident position about what kind of Brexit we would have got at the end of the day. Because, to be very clear, when Boris Johnson's deal passes in a few weeks, and Britain formally leaves the European Union at the end of January, Brexit will still only be a third or a quarter done. I mean, we've got to untangle all the economic relationships, and that's an entirely different thing. And we don't know what Boris Johnson is thinking there. He is not a details man.
Okay, from YouTube visitor, £5 super chat. Scotland's GDP deficit doesn't even meet the EU requirements. Even though I'm from England, I'd vote for them to leave. Blind nationalism.
Well, there we are. I mean, Scotland is not a big country. It's about 5 million people, I think. So it's territorially very big, and it's a country with a tremendous history and a phenomenal culture. I mean, the number of Scottish philosophers, for example, and artists and intellectuals is prodigious. It's completely out of proportion to the size of the country, but to the size of the population of the country. But simply separating Scotland from England may not be as straightforward as some people think in Scotland think it is. And I think that assuming that Scotland could just leave England and join the EU, I think may also be more complicated than I think some people think. But I have to say, I still think the direction now is probably that there. And undoubtedly, by the way, there are some people in England who wouldn't be sorry to see Scotland go. I would not be one of them, by the way. I would much prefer that we remain a united kingdom of Great Britain. But if Scotland goes, I would not, of course, oppose it. I mean, that is their right to do.
Okay, from Michael Flyer, under the terms of the GFA, there's a provision for an Irish unification vote. Now is the time for union to be broken.
Well, indeed. I mean, Ireland, I think there I'm going to be absolutely clear. I mean, the other momentous thing that Boris Johnson did is that, as I said, he moved the customs border between Britain and the EU from the Irish border potentially to the Irish Sea, something which the Conservatives and Boris Johnson himself had assured the Democratic Unionist Party that would never happen. That means that the linkages, the economic linkages between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland are going to be greater in some respects than those between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. My own view about this, and I was in Ireland earlier this year, is that an Irish unification is now inevitable. I don't know how long it will take, but I don't think it will take that long, perhaps 10 years or so.
Okay. From Boneless Ear, 200 Czech. Hello from Czech. Hello, Boneless Ear. Thank you for that super chat. And from Jan, a 20 Canadian dollar super chat. Will Boris make the effort to maintain his new electorate?
Yes, and that's going to be a huge challenge for him to do, because, of course, many of these people who voted for Boris Johnson in this election and for the Conservatives are not natural Conservatives. Many of them are quite left-wing on various issues. They voted Conservative because they wanted to see Brexit done. They voted Leave, and they're very angry with the Labour Party because the Labour Party ignored them. And if I can also add a class and regional thing, if northern working class voters are not impressed when affluent middle class southern Remain voters tell them that it is in their own interests to remain within the EU, and that that they would suffer economically if they left, because northern working class voters know perfectly well that southern middle class voters don't actually care about them very much. That has been their historic experience. So this idea that so many people in London have, that you could scare these people into changing their position on Brexit, it was so misjudged. I can't even find words to say how foolish I think it was. But those people are not necessarily natural Conservative voters. Many of them, would consider themselves left-wing. If the Labour Party accepts what has happened, accepts that Brexit must now happen, then I can very easily see many of these people deciding at some point to return to the Labour Party. And yes, the Conservatives have won a string of seats that were formerly Labour and have always been Labour. But the Conservatives have only won those seats, in many cases, by the thinnest of margins. So it wouldn't take very much for the Conservatives to lose those seats back to Labour again. Boris Johnson can't take the coalition that has propelled him back to power for granted. He's got to think very carefully about how he positions himself in future. And the Labour Party, as I said, unless it continues to behave in a foolish and reckless way, which it might very well do, because with the Labour Party, anything is possible, has a future if it plays its cards carefully and it waits, and if it waits long enough for Boris Johnson to make any missteps. Politics never ends, and this isn't the end of politics in Britain. It's, as Alex said at the beginning of the programme, a new stage in British politics, but it's not the end of politics here.
Right. Okay, from Sparky. Once Prime Minister of Vichy Britain, Alexander Mercouris, is in place, the US will flood the UK with chlorinated chicken. No health worries. The US has the finest, most natural chlorine in the world.
Well, there we go. I mean, no doubt.
Prime Minister Mercouris has a nice ring to
hardly. It's a horrible idea, actually. I wouldn't want to.
Right, thank you.
Or the tea in China, as we sometimes say. No doubt some of that chlorine is the same chlorine that found its way to Syria, and which the OPCW inspectors couldn't find there. But there we go. I don't know what this deal is going to be between Britain and the United States. I'm someone who is not particularly fussed about chlorinated chicken. A lot of people in Britain are. And it is fair to say the British have very, very, very high food standards by comparison with other countries.
Right. From Sparky, since the U.S. has all the healthcare problems perfectly solved, why would the British be wary of the U.S. coming to help solve their healthcare issues?
That is an exceptional point. It's been made by many people. I'm surprised, by the way, Jeremy Corbyn didn't make it in the election. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn didn't fight, I have to say, a tremendously good campaign. We discussed it recently in a video, and I just defined it as muddle and incompetence. And he was constantly pulling his punches, and he could have made a lot out of that particular issue. I think deep down he knew he was going to lose. I think he knew that the position he was in was a false one.
Interesting. From Craig R, £5 super chat. Thank you, Craig, for that super chat. From A Sanchez, $9.99 super chat. If Scotland leaves, don't you simply have a backstop problem on that border? Now you'll have to show your papers to travel into the UK. You can't have free movement with both.
Of course you do. No question. I mean, I think the Scots, I think a lot of people in Scotland have not yet, as I said, fully thought this through. I think that before Scotland were to just join the EU, there would certainly need to be a transition period. And there would certainly need to be a period when Scotland functioned as an independent country outside the EU. Bear in mind, there are countries like Norway that are outside the EU and that are smaller or about the same size as Scotland, and which do quite well. So I'm not saying that Scotland couldn't do it. And the political cultures between Scotland and England are very different now, and there is already an existing institutional separation, and that could get bigger. But as I said, people in Scotland do need to start thinking through the implications of some of this. It's not as straightforward as I think some of them think it is.
Okay, from Craig R, £5 super chat. Alexander, thanks for a great channel. Wishing you a happy Christmas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Wish you a happy Christmas.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. From Mikhail Lende, 100K is 100,000. 00 IQ is high. You are right. It is a high IQ.
It would be a very high IQ. It would be, I think, an IQ of planetary dimensions.
That's right.
Even galactic dimensions, actually.
Okay. From Jawaku for a £5 super chat. If Scotland became independent, would it retain the Queen as the head of state, like Canada or Australia?
Yes,
or would it become a republic?
The Scottish nationalists, as I understand it, intend to keep the Queen, the monarchy, as their monarch. I would point out that, of course, the way in which Britain unified was that when Queen Elizabeth I of England died in 1603, the King of Scotland, who was James VI, inherited the throne of England and became King of England as well as King of Scotland. So she is, as we speak, and this is continued, she is the Queen of Scotland independently. Well, she's the Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain, but there is a historic Scottish monarchy which would be revived in that case, and which actually in some ways was the monarchy which actually extended to England rather than the other way around. Not widely known, I think, outside the UK.
All right, from Sparky, Farage may have believed polls showing Labour as more of a threat than it was. A foolish mistake, which could prove to negate his life's work.
Well, well, first of all, I personally think it was a mistake. I'm not sure that one was a foolish mistake. You see, it's very difficult to know. It's very difficult. I think it's all but impossible to say how the dynamic of the election would have played out if the Brexit Party had gone on to fight every seat in the way that Nigel Farage at one point suggested that it might have done. I mean, I doubt that the Labour vote would have been any greater. I can't see how it could have been, actually, but there might have been all kinds of things going on between the Conservatives and the Brexit Party, and it might be also that the Brexit Party might have taken some votes from Labour too. So the dynamic of the election would have been completely different, and I'm not sure how it would have played out. And it might have been that, you know, as he was looking at the situation before he made that decision, that, I think, wrong decision, you know, he was getting polling data which suggested that if he did fight the election across the whole of the UK, that would have meant a much greater prospect of another hung parliament, and with the Conservatives much weaker and therefore unable to take Brexit forward. I think on balance, you are right, and that the Conservatives would still have won with a majority. But mistake though I think it was, I wouldn't go so far as to call it a foolish mistake. I can see why it was done.
Okay, from Sparky, I'll bet many EU members regret not keeping their own currency. Could an independent Scotland simply keep using the pound?
Oh yes, I mean, I think that's one of the things that the Scots want to do. Absolutely. They want to keep the pound, but one of the points that again hasn't really been considered is that, of course, who actually manages and administers the pound? The answer is the Bank of England, and that's based in London. So does Scotland want to have its monetary policy decided for it in London by a central bank which is not accountable to Scotland anymore? I mean, you know, we've got to think these through. Yeah. I mean, Ireland did develop its own currency, the Irish pound, which was eventually absorbed into the euro. For a very long time, they harmonized it with the British pound, and maybe that is a better system, realistically.
Okay. From Van Stone 2000, £5 super chat. Do you think the London Mayor Sadiq Khan will run for leader of the Labour Party with the help from Tony Blair?
Well, you know, there's another good case. I mean, I mentioned Keir Starmer, who people have been talking about as a potential Labour leader, who I think it would be completely wrong to elect, because he is an ardent Remainer. He is the architect of the Remain policy. He and Tony Blair, in their different ways, are the architect of the Remain policy that Labour fought the election with, and is therefore, to a great extent, the author of Labour's big electoral defeat. Sadiq Khan, who is the Mayor of London, is an even more extreme example of this. He has been a fervid Remainer. He actually advocated that Labour adopt a straightforward Remain position. I mean, delusional to my mind, popular with lots of people in London, no doubt, but deeply unpopular in England as a whole. And if he ever were to become leader of the Labour Party, and frankly, I don't think Labour would have much chance of a revival 5 years from now, or whenever the next election took place.
Okay, from Mikhail Ende, 20 SEK. Thank you very much once again, Mikhail, for that. From Sparky, a $5 super chat. Better not tell your fellow Brits that there's chlorine in their water system. Chlorinated chicken, breasts, salmonella chicken every time. Okay.
Well, indeed. I mean, can I just say? I mean, I used to, when I was at school, we used to go trooping off every week to the swim baths, which is very much part of the sort of exercise we did. And I remember the amount of chlorine that was in the water there. So, I believe they still put chlorine in swimming baths in England. So, I mean, I personally think this whole thing about chlorine is wildly exaggerated. There may be all kinds of reasons for being wary about trade deals with the US. The question somebody else put about, why would we want to import American health systems into the UK, and worries about the American insurance companies being introduced into the National Health Service. I think those are valid concerns. I think this chlorinated chicken thing is wildly overblown, actually. My view.
Okay, from Mikhail and another super chat, 20 SEK. You are heroes. Thank you very much, Mikhail, for that super chat. We appreciate it very much. And the last super chat, Alexander. Oh, the second to last. Another one just came in. Duran from Phil. Phil Swede for Trump. Duran bobbleheads would rock. Greetings from Sweden. How's everything going in Sweden? We have a video that we should do. We should do a video. We should do very soon. But Duran bobbleheads would be very cool. Absolutely. And the final super chat from Reality Check. Are you going to have a live stream before Christmas? Yes, we are. We should have a couple of live streams before Christmas. Actually, it's a good way to segue into the fact that we will be doing a live stream on Monday. And it is going to be kind of a 100,000 subscriber live stream where we're just going to take your questions, your geopolitical questions. Whatever you have on your mind, let us know. That has to do with politics or geopolitics. We're going to try to answer as many questions as we can. And while we have a good breadth of knowledge of what's going on around the world, there are certain spots in some areas,
like Bristol,
where we simply just
Wales.
No, but we'll try our best to field all the questions that you give us. So that'll be taking place on Monday. I'll put that up on YouTube when I have a better idea as to the time that it will take place. And the final super chat from Maureen is thank you for taking the time to discuss Scotland. Thank you very much, Maureen, for that final super chat. We will end it there, Alexander. Elections are over. Now the UK heads towards Brexit, some sort of Brexit.
Some sort of Brexit.
Let's see what happens and what unfolds.
Still a work in progress, but
we are still at the beginning.
We're still at the beginning.
Yeah, it is a work in progress. And Sparky sent us a final super chat. I second the motion for the Duran bobbleheads. Yes. We should develop a Michigan mug. Your dog, Michigan. That I think is in the works. We should definitely do.
I'll just show you my dog, by the way. This isn't.
Where is he? He's crashed out on the sofa.
Yes, he is. Okay.
Okay. We'll end it on that note. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this live stream. The Oracle of London, Alexander Mercurs. Thank you very much for answering all those questions and for giving us your insight as to what happened a day after the elections in the UK. To everyone that saw us and watched us and tuned in, thank you very much for all your super chats, for all your questions, for all your support. We really appreciate it. Duran shop 20%, DRN20, get 20% off all our merchandise. And what else? Find us on Soundcloud, on iTunes, download Telegram and join us there. We really love Telegram. We'll post this video on BitChute as well, and duranvideo.com. Alexander, any final words as we sign off for this evening?
I would simply say we've got lots coming still in Britain. It's not over by any means in politics, as it always goes on. We will see what Boris Johnson does with all his with his mandate, and we will also see what happens to the Labour Party. I mean, as I said, the Labour Party has this history of civil wars, And of course, if they now descend into a war with each other, with recriminations and finger pointing and all of that, and refuse to learn what I think are the very obvious lessons of not just this election, but of the last 3 years since the Brexit referendum, then frankly, I mean, they will go down to mortar feeds.
All right.
But if they don't,
right,
they have a future. And I mean, they do have a future. I mean, I think this is an important thing to say. They are a tradition. They are a valid tradition in Britain, and you know, a real one. But it's up to them. It's up to Boris Johnson how he handles things with Brexit now. It's up to the Labour Party how it sorts out its own issues.
All right. And a couple of other things that I want to note. We did say we're going to try to do another Sweden video, a follow-up there. I saw in the live stream, a lot of people were asking about France. We'll try to do a follow-up video as to what's going on in France. That's an important story. And the story about Turkey and Libya and Greece, that is also an interesting story, which we will also look to get out there as well. So because today's live stream was focused on the UK elections, we didn't touch any other things going on in geopolitics, of course, the impeachment stuff and all the madness that's going on in the US as well with the impeachment craziness. We've got more videos on the way with that as well. But for tonight, this Friday evening for me, Friday evening as well for everybody in the UK, we're going to sign off. Wherever you are in the world, we hope you have a great weekend ahead of you. And please join us on Monday for another live stream. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody. Have a great morning, afternoon, or evening.